Hi everybody, welcome to the first of my Criterium racing videos. Today we're looking at the second Cycling South Australia Winter Criterium at Victoria Park in Adelaide. My name's Barnaby. I'm a very much middle of the pack C-grade racer or a Cat 3 cyclist. And I'll be reviewing these videos over the next few months, looking at what I did well, what I can improve on, and what terrible mistakes I inevitably made and hopefully that you can learn from. Over the next few videos I'll be inviting a few other riders to watch through with me and hopefully add their more experienced perspectives. Now before we get started with the race analysis, there's a few things I need to mention. Firstly, the video quality isn't fantastic. I'm sorry about that. Unfortunately this is a second-hand GoPro and the lens is scratched right in the middle, so there's always that little blur right in front of me. Secondly, I'm still working out how to use Garmin Verb, so occasionally the data isn't perfectly synced up. I'm also using a Stages left-only power meter, and through testing with a couple of other different power meters, it looks like my recording's about 15% below my actual power. So when it looks like I'm pumping out 100 watts, I'm probably pumping out more like 120, 115, 120. And just finally, this video it was taken in early July of 2020 in Adelaide, South Australia. We're in a really good spot with COVID at the moment. There's about 3 active cases in the state, all in quarantine, and it's been about 3 months since the last locally transmitted case. So we're lucky enough that our pandemic restrictions are basically down to physical distancing and having COVID-safe action plans. The other thing is, like I said before, I'm relatively mid-pack C-grade. I'm still learning how to race bikes. This is the second race back after a couple of months off. And as you can see, the bunch and me, we're all still a little bit twitchy. So on to the race. This is a race in 2 very distinct halves. The first half of this race was honestly pretty cruisy. My normalised power for the first 20 minutes was about 250 watts, so again add 10 to 15%. But the second half saw my effort spike to about 300. My FTP is about 316, so I was really on the rivet for the last of it. Now there's a few teams to look out for in this race. On the left and the right with the red shoulders is Butterfield's Van Dam Racing. They've got the App Select logo on the backs of their kits. They're a really strong team. They're a few years old in South Australia and they've got some really good development happening with their juniors. The other team, or another big team to look for, is the Norwood Cycling Club. Just ahead is, and just passing back on the left, in the sort of red and purple, red and blue kits, and also Phil in the green ADX Depot kit. He's on his own today, but he's a fantastic wheel to follow. If you can, he's got heaps and heaps of experience. He's also a pretty all-round top bloke, always happy to offer a bit of advice. I'm on my own today. My team's either not racing or has gone up to B grade. So this is just me. So let's have a quick talk about the course. It's a very, very simple right-hand turn crit course. This is on a track that's tailor-made for bike racing and for car racing. What used to be the Clipsal 500, now the Adelaide 500, races here every year. It's a bit frustrating. They spend 3 months setting up grandstands, which blocks off the track. They then spend another 3 months taking them down and 3 days in the middle racing cars. At this point in the course, you've just gone through a relatively sharp right-hand bend. There's no reason why you should ever be touching the brakes here. And then coming around this corner, there's a very slight hill. People tend to slow down coming into the hill, and then they tend to sprint as they go into it, going up the hill. At this point, we're coming into the finishing straight, and this is where usually the sprint's well and truly going. And if you're struggling at that point, then the hills are usually enough just to knock you off a few wheels, as you'll see close to the end of this race. Start-finish line's just there. Ignore the little flag on the mini-map. I haven't quite figured out how to work that around yet. Today we had very little wind. What wind there was a headwind coming up this way, and then a tailwind going down the back straight, which usually means we've got pretty fast speeds. That's often a good time to attack, I think, because you can usually get quite a long way away down the main straight without the pack catching on too quickly. Alright, I'm going to move forward now to the first real dig. So I mentioned at the beginning that this is the second race back after a bit of a break from crit racing, and in fact any group bunch riding, and the peloton's quite nervous, and you can see that just coming up here. The pace is on. We're pushing 43 k's an hour going up the hill into the headwind. I'm doing 400 watts just trying to keep on, and then this guy sits up and then he hits his brakes, and you can hear I put on a pretty big handful of brakes trying not to go up his backside. That was, I think, one of the only times I touched my brakes in the whole race, but the whole peloton took at least the first 20 minutes to get used to riding in a group again, and things smoothed out. However, that was the start of the bike racing proper, and this is when the first couple of digs start to go. At this point, I'm still doing 500 watts and really barely keeping in the wheels. And I can see ahead of me that the race does start to break up a little bit. We're lined up pretty much single file, but I figure it's only 10 minutes into the race, and it's probably a little bit early for anything proper to get away. And just coming up here, I just sat back and trusted that things would get back together again, and fortunately I was right. So you can just see at this point a little gap's opening up ahead. I was a bit nervous about that. Fortunately, people up closer to the front managed to close it down, and I didn't have to do too much extra work. So after that dig, we're coming through the finishing straight at between 45 and 50 k's an hour, which is moving quite a bit at that point, given that you just come up the hill. Once we got to the top though, things slowed down, and this is something I did a couple of times in this race. As the race slowed up, I just put in a little bit of extra effort, came around the outside, and as people sat up, I was able to move up from what felt like the back of the race right up into the top 15 wheels. And at this point I don't want to be sitting anywhere near the front, so I'm hanging in behind the Van Dam and the Norwood guys, finding a spot to slot right back in. Now, one of the riders to keep an eye out for this is 351, just ahead of me. Near the end of the race, he puts in a really big effort to get his teammate right up to the front, and I was fortunate that I saw him waving his teammate through it and managed to get on that wheel. He was a really strong rider, and that teammate was the guy just here. I can't quite see his numbers, but this guy with the blue helmet and the white socks is he was right up there in the sprint at the very end. So there's a couple of strong riders here who I picked quite early on as being good wheels to follow. This Absolute guy with the orange shoes, but also number 347. I'm pretty sure he was riding for Norwood, and I saw he was wanting to move up here. He put in a few big digs, so I hopped on his wheel, and as you can see, he was moving up quite quickly, and he managed to drag me all the way up to the front of the race, or at least up a few wheels. So we're 16 minutes into the race. I decided to start moving up a bit and get the door slammed nicely in my face. I don't think there was anything in it, just the line moved left. So I'm a bit conscious at this point in the race that I'm not particularly a strong rider. I'm not good in a breakaway, just sitting out there holding 350 watts. So while I'm taking every opportunity to try to move up when I can, so I'm sitting behind 329, I'm also not wanting to get too close to the front. So occasionally I'll follow a good wheel up near the front and then just drop in behind and not really take advantage. So at this point the race has slowed up. If I'd followed his wheel, we probably could have attacked over the front, but at the moment I don't think I can win a race that way, and so I'm just happy slotting back here in about 6th or 7th wheel and letting other people do the work for the moment. Now here's one of the mistakes that I made in this race. So what I missed is the guy attacking off the front is a Van Dam Racing Butterfield's rider, and there's 3 of them here. The right-hand rider, the left-hand rider, and the guy attacking off the front. There's a Norwood rider directly ahead of me, and the solo who dragged me up to the front, he's just done a big effort, and he's probably not going to do much at the moment. Plus the 2 Butterfields riders, well, they're not going to chase their teammate down. Now the mistake that I made is that I didn't realise that the guy off the front was a Butterfields rider. So I'm slotting in, expecting these other guys to work to chase that back, and obviously that's not going to happen. I let the Butterfields rider in, and again, not wanting to be too close to the front, I let the other guy in and take his wheel, rather than doing what I should have, which is probably fight for the wheel, either directly ahead of him or 2 wheels ahead of him. Now the solo's pulled off, it's just the Norwood guy, and the 2 Butterfields guys are just happily sitting in, and they've got everything going their way right now. They've got a guy at the front, they've got 2 guys sitting near the front, and they don't have to do any work. As you can see, I finally actually get behind this guy and into his draft at this point. So what do? I'm a solo. I'm not feeling particularly strong today. There's a guy off the front and 2 of his teammates. Now, what I could do is trust that we are 18 minutes into a 35-40 minute crit, and it's far too early for a solo to stay off the front. I could also take the view that since I'm a solo, Norwood's here in force, and there's lots of other strong riders out, I really shouldn't be doing anything. Unfortunately, that's not really what I do, and I put in a bit of an effort here to try to bring him back. So we've got some other riders coming up from behind. Obviously I have actually sat back a little bit. Now the solos, I was going to let him slot in. Again, I don't want to be too close to the front. He's struggling, he's done a lot of work. So eventually I do put in a bit of a dig to get on this wheel. And here's where I don't quite understand what's going on here. There's Butterfields on the front, and he looks like he's doing a pretty big effort. And he flicks the elbow through, and for a moment I let him sit there, but then, and this is where I make the big mistake, I come through and I put in a fairly big effort to try to close some of that gap. There's another guy off the front. This guy isn't the one who's just attacked. I get in behind him to try to get a bit of a draft, but now I'm still sitting on the front and I'm still tapping out probably about 300 watts, trying to chase this guy down. Now I'm trying to get off the front. And what I should have done is just stopped pedaling entirely, but I'm a bit nervous about going too far back into the pack, and I don't want to be swallowed up and swamped too much, because then if there is a break or a split, I don't want to be on the wrong side of that. In any event, the video skips out here for a bit. Unfortunately my GoPro's a bit glitchy, and so we come back in about a minute and a half later, and we have managed to bring this guy back. .323 from Coffeelosophy. Definitely got the best beard in the peloton at the moment. And once again, you can see 347 sitting up near the front. He was a pretty strong rider, and he made quite a few efforts just to move up. And if I'd been paying a bit more of attention, I probably would have stuck his wheel a bit more. But as you can see, the catch has been made, and we're really just slowing down, cruising down Main Straight at 45 k's an hour, doing barely any effort. We're not really gunning for it at the moment. This bottom corner, there's a couple of different ways you can take it, and the way most people tend to is, I think, a bit too shallow. I take the pedal pre-line, usually, which means you come out a bit wider, you drop a few gears, and rather than doing a really big surge to get up to speed, you can just keep your power going fairly easily, come on the power a lot earlier in the corner, and that way you're already spinning at 110 RPM when you're coming up this hill, and usually I'm just cruising while everyone's still standing up and sprinting. A little bit of cross-country riding up ahead. Now this gets a bit nerve-wracking because I can see a big gap opening up and none of these guys at the front are wanting to do any work. And so I burn a match, and a fairly big match at this point, to try to catch it. My power data doesn't seem to support that. And as soon as I start getting most of the way across, they sit up, and not only do they sit up, but they absolutely throw out the parachutes. And so I'm now coming around them, coasting at 30 k's an hour, sitting on the brakes, trying not to run up the back of them. That was a mistake, and I spent a lot of effort there that I definitely regretted coming near the end. Unfortunately, all I could see was a gap opening up, the first 6 riders doing absolutely nothing, and all too often that can end up with a split in the peloton. What I should have paid attention to was the fact that at least a couple of other strong riders were back there with me. Phil in the green 80X depot was right next to me. He's never going to miss a split, and he's the sort of rider who can pretty much single-handedly drag back a breakaway. Unfortunately, I wasn't paying attention to that, and I burnt a match. Now, another thing to mention is that the A grade's racing at the same time. You've just seen a breakaway of A grade go past. The A grade's a bit of an interesting tactical issue when you're racing in C grade, because we have to pull over to the left and let them pass us, and so when there's a split up the road like there is here, we might have to pull over, let the brake go past, and then stay to the side whilst the main peloton comes past. And what happens reasonably frequently for people who are really paying attention and feeling good, particularly in the last 5-10 minutes of a race, is if you can see that A grade's coming, that's a really good time to make an attack. As soon as they start making contact with the back of the C grade, you'll often see people attacking off the front, because half the peloton will hesitate, they'll pull over. Meanwhile, that person can get a good 100-metre gap before the A grade actually catches them. They can pull over to the left, but A grade's going to go straight round a solo rider, whereas they'll be yelling keep left to a pack. In this case, that hasn't happened. We've just sort of cruised, slowed down a bit. We're only doing 30 up the back straight, as opposed to 45 in a previous lap. So we're obviously not going too hard at this point. Now we're getting reasonably close to the end of the race. and this is when the attacks start coming, and this is honestly when the race started getting really quite hard. These guys attacked. It was too close to the end of the race to let anything go, so I go after them, put in a pretty big dig to get on this guy's wheel, managed to get up there, but from this point onwards I'm not getting any opportunities to recover, and this is where I made a few errors when I could have been recovering, but instead I was working needlessly. At this point I'm pretty happy just hanging on for the life of me. You can see my heart rate spiked up to 180, it'll keep going up from here, and I'm having to work pretty hard to stay on this guy's wheel. We've got a Van Dam racer on the front, he's really pushing the pace. I think that's Solo second, Solo third as far as I can tell, and me just sitting at the back. This is never going to get away, but the pace is certainly rising. Now, honestly, I think I'm too far forwards here, but this is where I ended up after I put the dig in to get onto the wheel. Who knows, there could have been a break, but at this point I'm unfortunately suckered into doing a bit of work on the front. Again, that's A-grade passing on the right, that's not us. I'm doing the right thing at this point, slotting in and not taking a turn. Again, I've got no obligation to. There's no one up the road as far as I know. I'm not in a team. I haven't got anyone that I'm chasing or I'm pulling. These two guys seem happy to do a bit of work. There is absolutely no reason for me to get on the front right now. And indeed, I'm sitting up here, hoping to let a few other people come through so that I'm not sitting so close to the front. My difficulty is I don't want to be on the front, I don't want to be too close to the front, but if I slot back any more than a few wheels I always feel like I'm going to be swamped. And so I always end up sitting too close to the front. And again here, I'm sitting up trying not to do any work, but no one's coming through. And what I end up doing is just burning some matches sitting in the wind, going absolutely nowhere. I mean, I'm doing 350 watts. There's no one up the road. There is no reason for me to be doing any work. And again, we're too close to the end of the race to be wasting any matches. And here's where I'm making a huge mistake. I'm on the front. What am I doing on the front? I'm pumping out 300 watts. There's no one up the road. I'm not in a team. I shouldn't be doing any work. And there goes an attack. And because I'm on the front, I don't have the legs to follow it. Now, it's a solo rider going up. It's still too early in the race for that to be a real problem, especially with the teams behind and a couple of really strong solo riders. But I've now spent a bit of energy and I've now had to work really hard to get into these wheels. If I'd been sitting a few wheels further back, I could have seen some of these attacks coming, put in some digs and never put my nose in the wind. I've decided the pace is a bit hot. sitting right at the front, so I've dropped the power. I'm hoping people are going to come around me and start chasing this down, this wheel that I've dropped, and eventually someone does, but in the meantime I've been sitting out in the wind completely pointlessly. When the pace really does hot up a bit later on, I don't have any matches left to really go with it. And you can see from here attacks start coming harder and harder, and I'm having to put in big efforts just to try to stay in the wheels. So at this point we've got two guys up the road. We've got Select, Van Dam Racing Butterfields doing a few turns on the front to try to chase it down. Obviously they haven't got anyone in that. Once again I'm happy sitting behind this guy. But we're hitting 50 k's an hour and the pace was right up there. Now the traditional wisdom at this point is as soon as the pace slows down you attack over the top, and that's exactly what happens, just not by me. And once again the pace hits up, I'm having to put in a few digs. And my heart rate's now up at about 187, and that's basically where it's topping out for me at the moment. So I'm certainly working really hard just to keep in the wheels. Now the problem I'm facing at this point is that all of these little micro breaks, which are usually enough to get me back into things, because I've spent so much effort on the front only a lap or two ago, I'm not recovering enough in these little micro breaks. I'm hitting 450 watts, again just staying in the wheels, but I haven't recovered from the last time I did that. And as you can see, I've got no hope of going over the top. Every time someone does attack, I'm just having to dig deep just to stay in it, come around a rider, and just hope that I can stick with it until Now on our right we've got Sam Welsford and Kellen O'Brien, two of the A graders going past. These guys are absolute machines. I think it was their intention today to try to lap the A grade. They stayed away for the whole race. Kellen managed to come away with the win, and they probably got 3/4 of a lap on A grade, and that's an A grade featuring some of the Australian national track team. So it's a pretty specky field, and those two were just streets and miles ahead of them. Back to our race. We've got the last couple of laps. I think there's a lap to go here, and I can see 351 here motioning to his buddy who's not in Norwood kit to get on his wheel. I saw that and I decided to stick on this guy's wheel as much as I could. Now this guy's either got his numbers really high up his back or he's just got a really flat back position, because I cannot read his numbers, but he's not much of a draft either. He's so small, such a small windbreak that I'm having to work hard even in his wheel. But 351, who's Nick Underwood, tows him up, and at this point I'm sitting pretty, just getting a free tow up to the front, which is exactly what I wanted. Still having to work pretty hard. You can see Phil Crick in the green just up ahead. He's in the right spot. You can bet he hasn't done any work he hasn't needed to do up to this point. I was chatting to him during the race actually, and he was saying it was a bit of a different experience racing without a teammate. Last race he did have someone working with him. I think he came 5th today. So 351 drops off his mate. At this point though, I don't have the legs to go with him all the way, so I slot in a few wheels behind him. Now obviously the best thing to do would have been to try to stick on his wheel, and push it all the way through to the end and just hope to have something left in the sprint. But at this point, I'm just struggling even in the wheels, even in the draft, just trying to keep up. And at this point, I don't have anything left. I can't go with it. I probably did have a sprint in me, but I didn't have anything left for the 200 meters to get me up to the sprint. So I sat up and let the race go past. And that's pretty much the story of the race. I did a little bit too much too early in the race, and I sat in the wind where I absolutely should not have. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. Hopefully there'll be a few more, and I'll see you on the next one.